Hello and welcome to the SuperShow podcast. Today I am your host Alex Jones and of course as always I am joined by a man who has completely changed his opinion on Stellar Blade and the whole controversy. Jamie, how are you doing, mate?
My right arm is a little bit stiff, a little bit tired, but other than that, I'm happy to be here and I'm happy to report that Eve is a knockout. And I was actually really ill-informed last time. I knew that you could change what she wore. I didn't even know that at that point, though, that you could change her hair, you could change her glasses, and even change her earrings.
What?
So, yeah, it turns out it went deeper.
My
So
mind,
did I.
my mind is blown. I don't want to give away too much, but Jamie will be giving us a little bit more of a rundown about his thoughts about Stellar Blade as he's been playing it in this past week. But we don't just have that for you. We are also going to be talking about Xbox closing it down multiple Bethesda studios. We're going to be discussing the Helldivers 2 controversy as they tried to force PSN accounts onto PC gamers. How dare they? We're also going to be touching on the news that Nintendo may have given away some extra info about when the Nintendo Switch 2 will be launched. All that coming up soon. But first of all, I just want to say that you can get us on YouTube and on X at SuperShow Pod. We're also available on podcasting platforms. I'm talking Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, or anywhere you might want to get your good podcasting. That's not a sentence. Anywhere,
good podcasting podcast.
Anywhere you, because I was thinking of the good books thing. Anywhere, any good bookshop.
Oh,
I was trying to think of that thing, but I didn't do that very well, did I? Any good podcast platform. There we go. Whatever.
I like the implication because it puts the owners on the store. It's like, no, it's their fault if we're the good books. It's their fault if they don't stock us.
That is exactly right. If they don't stock, they're a bad bookshop. So if they don't have us, they're a bad podcasting platform. We're also on paisleyradio.com Thursdays at 10 p.m. repeated on Mondays at 10 p.m. Oh, done. The little bit we have to do at the beginning.
Got it out of the way, Jamesy. Yeah. You smashed it. You can relax now. Now the rest of it is just reading a document and hoping conversation gets sparked.
Absolutely. We are, of course, live right now. This is going on YouTube Tuesday, about 10 p.m. British time. And I would like to give a shout out to some awesome people that have joined us in the live chat on YouTube. I'm going to give a shout out to Magni, Rodrigo, Wesley Thibodeau. I hope that's how you say that. So thank you. And 69DJ, who's also in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us. We love that you guys pop along and I can read your comments and laugh about them in silence as Jamie tries to, give us the salient points for the week. So I appreciate it.
Well, don't speak too soon. I don't know if I can live up to salient this week.
But look, the first news story we've got coming in is the one that, of course, we've referenced in the title and the thumbnail. It is the news that Xbox has done something pretty not drastic. Maybe that's the wrong word. Surprising in some respects, maybe not so surprising in others. But they have taken a bit of a hatchet to a few developers. And they have sent a memo around to staff at Arkane, Tango, AlphaDog, and Roundhouse Games to inform them that they will all be closing down, with some staff joining other teams. I think when you sort of hear this news, the first off, it's not massively surprising when you think of something like certain games, like studios getting shut down after bad performances is one thing, but the pedigree that some of these studios have. And just maybe having a bit of an iffy record recently, or having a really good record recently, I think this is pretty crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, like there aren't many things nowadays when it comes to the games industry that make me kind of jump out my chair a little bit and reach for my phone and immediately start messaging people to, one, I guess, perhaps inform them if they haven't seen the news already, and then two, immediately starting to pick their brains on what they think of, what is in this case a pretty shocking revelation. But this was one of those pieces of news. I was really rather taken aback by it. I suppose we are entering into, or in some respects have for a long time now been in, a kind of a very strange period for the games industry. A period where we are kind of recovering from maybe growing a little bit too quickly, maybe stretching beyond our means as a result of, the way the games industry responded to things like the pandemic and so on and so forth. We've been through the kind of the catalysts for a lot of the changes the industry has experienced in the last 12 to 18 months. And there have been a lot of incredibly sad stories to have emerged in that time. And we've gone over a lot of them on this podcast. And there have been, for our sins, there have been times where we haven't gone over them on this podcast because we can't bear to sit down for another week and say, here's another studio that closed, here's another however many people that lost their jobs, because it's not fun news to deliver. It's even less fun news to kind of to break down. And it was almost kind of becoming standard that you'd have another one of those stories every week or two to report on. And yet this one, and I'm not trying to diminish the significance of any other studio closures or anyone else that lost their jobs, but I think this one kind of like really hit home in a really unusual way, given the way that Microsoft and Xbox have gone about their strategy of building out their family of studios, the way they kind of talked about the kind of work they want these studios to do and the way they're going to promote that work internally and the way they're going to leverage services like Game Pass to allow these studios to be independent and make the kind of games they want. And just the significance, the names of these studios. I mean, we're talking about. I'm not going to pretend that all four of the studios being hit by this are on the same level playing field. But when we're talking about Arkane, Austin, and when we're talking about Tango Gameworks, you're talking about two developers that have worked themselves into, really solid situations, solid positions with the audience, with their players in recent years. And even if they weren't coming off a smash hit, like, I think you kind of alluded to with Arkane, Austin, and Redfall, for example, yes, that was a bit of a mess. And the next game would have had to be considered almost like a recovery from that. But you only have to go one game prior to that to arrive at Prey, which was a hideously underappreciated game and one of the finest games of that generation, a game I still go back to every now and then. Tango, it's even more shocking given some of the quotes that people are now digging out around Hi-Fi Rush. It just really, it really hit home in a way that I wasn't expecting, and it opens up a real Pandora's box in terms of what Xbox Game Studios look like now, and what the future holds for other studios that could potentially be in a similar position either now or in the future, based on some of the other things that Matt Booty said in this kind of round robin memo that went around.
Yeah, I think just to give people sort of the rough idea. So as Jamie said there, so Arkane Austin responsible for Redfall and for Prey. They've also worked on / been responsible for Dishonored, Deathloop. They were involved in the new Blade game. This is going off the games that they list on their website. Obviously,
because they're kind of partnered or sistered with Arkane Leon, who
exactly, yeah.
I think they kind of went back and forth on which one led which project. I know Deathloop and Blade in particular were kind of like Leon led.
Yes, so whilst those games were coming out of Austin, they were still obviously linked to them, which is makes it. Yeah, I just didn't want to just say that they just made Prey and.
Right, no, it's a very good point.
They've had other stuff in the works as well, but like you said, they weren't the primary studio on those games. But yeah, we do have some quotes from this memo that Xbox Game Studios head Matt Booty emailed round to staff. This is coming in from IGN reporting on this. So he said, these changes are grounding in prioritizing high-impact titles and further investing in Bethesda's portfolio of blockbuster games and beloved worlds which you have nurtured over many decades. This is him, setting out to the workers. So yeah, the main thing that they are trying to do is they're looking at the reprioritization of titles and resources. And effectively, yeah, so what they're saying is whilst they're getting rid of the studios, they are not getting rid of all the staff. They're sort of I don't know there's got to be a douchey business word, I guess, for like moving people from one place to another. Like restructuring, that's what they call it, isn't it? Restructuring.
Efficiency pops up a lot.
Efficiency. Restructuring. Yeah, I think these are all sort of words that crop up. They have said that some members from Arkane Austin some members of the team will be joining other studios to work on projects across Bethesda. And Redfall's this is specifically now talking about Redfall, said Redfall's previous update will be its last as they end development on the game. The game and its servers will remain online for players to enjoy, and we will provide make good offers to players who purchase the Hero DLC. So this is, I guess, people that have paid for the for DLC that now won't be coming out. They will be making good on the fact that those people won't be getting something that they've already paid for. Which that to me is maybe slightly more surprising, is that they're not even going to follow through with the remaining staff in order to make good on some of these ideas and pledges they've got.
Right. If anything, it kind of feeds into perhaps just how sudden the news was. Perhaps not just for us as members of the public, reading the articles and the news stories, but perhaps even for people at Arcane themselves. If we focused on Arcane just for a moment, again, I don't want to kind of buy into things I've seen on Twitter too readily because I know I've got no way of fact checking it. But there was a Twitter post that was kind of doing the rounds a little bit just prior to when we went live that supposedly showed like the change log and the development log on Redfall recently, and there was kind of an update branch within that that was called DLC 1 that was last updated something like 5 hours before the news dropped. So there is this idea going around. Again, I've yet to kind of be able to corroborate it or verify that it's accurate, but some people are suggesting that there might have been people over at Austin who are working on DLC that will not see the light of day mere hours before they lost their jobs. And I think the Hero Pass thing, or the Hero DLC, as Matt Booty refers to it, is comes from I think a sort of a deluxe version of the game that was sold for around $100. This game, which I think, again, am I right in saying that it's only a year old, Redfall, at this point, roughly?
I will. It's got to be about that. I will double check with the actual release date, but I think you're probably right.
So because obviously I think it launched with 4 heroes, but they plan to deliver more. The Hero Pass essentially allowed players to get access to, I think they were promised at least the first 2 heroes that would come out in the future for free should they have this pass.
1 year and 5 days it released ago. That's how
wow. Okay. In fact, I think that's maybe why there was actually a little bit of a, I'm not suggesting the timing is related with this specific story, but there was a little bit of chatter around Redfall in the past week or so. I think perhaps because the game was turning 1, and there's always inevitably that kind of conversation that people have, like, oh, is Redfall worth returning? You've got to get your Redfall ... 1 year later YouTube video in the mix. You've got to. So I think some of that stuff was happening, and then, of course, to receive this just a handful of days later, a real bummer. But yeah, it paints a picture of a situation where a project, a vision they weren't even allowed to see out, let alone green lighting whatever the next big ambitious project from Arkane would have been, which paints a picture of something that happened quite hastily, something that probably caught people off guard, and something that's probably a pretty bitter pill to swallow. Well, it's never going to be an easy pill to swallow, losing your job, but yeah, it's all sympathies, as always with these situations, to everyone affected, because it sucks.
How does this, on reflection, how does this sort of change your view of what Phil Spencer said last year when he was pushed on Arkane and Redfall, and the comments that he made around sort of like, we don't want to make people just do what we want to do, we want to give them scope to make try new things. Obviously, this is almost like throwing that back in their face now, because it's like, yeah, you can try new things, but if they don't work, you're dead.
Right. It makes it really hard to know kind of where you stand, not necessarily on an individual like Phil Spencer, because I think the fact that he is still willing to go out and do these interviews and be candid with information that I believe to have been true at the time, I think that's still valuable, and I still think that makes him somewhat unique within the the current gaming landscape. Certainly when it comes to his direct competitors from PlayStation and Nintendo, there's not really another kind of senior figure like him in terms of where he goes and what he says and how honest and open he usually is. What I think it suggests is that we need to remember that even someone like Phil Spencer operates within this, this vast, interconnected world of, other people and other heads and other boxes that need ticking. Microsoft is a massive company, a massive organization. And whilst people often talk about how big Microsoft is as an entity now, and, a lot of the kind of the bottom lines that you might see if you go and look over the kind of the money side of things on their Wikipedia page, you don't get to be a company like that by being nice,
right?
And like sometimes hard cuts and efficiencies and restructuring, like that is how these companies become the monoliths that they are. So I think that's now the asterisk. Asterisk is that Phil Spencer can only ever be as honest with the information, or present the information that he has as accurate as it is at the point at which it's delivered, right? And that these situations can still change, and there will be things that go beyond his control. Hindsight is always 2020. There's a lot of people already going to social media and picking out clips from as recent as last year where things like Hi-Fi Rush are being hailed as a success and as a successful kind of activation on the vision for what Xbox want to do when they bring these studios into the Xbox family, and what services like it at Game Pass enable them to do. And now, literally within a year, some of those quotes and some of these videos that people are sharing now, the story has changed dramatically. Part of me thinks that's a little bit unfair. Because, like I said, we're on social media. We can pick out these clips, we can pick out these interviews, and hindsight is 2020. But it is, like you said, it's a startling reminder that when Phil Spencer comes out and talks about this, which he will, and when he goes on a kind of a grassroots YouTube channel to talk about it very candidly, which he will,
maybe this one.
Maybe
reach out,
Phil. Just send us an email. I don't even know if you can get our email through our YouTube. You'll find us. Or if you look us up on Twitter, I think I tweeted 3 years ago about pissing in Death Stranding. That's me. I'm that one. My DMs are open. But he'll do that, and he'll come across as open, and he'll come across as vulnerable, and he'll be sad and sympathetic towards the individuals that were affected by this. And I'll believe him, but the context will now and will remain indefinitely from this point onwards that he is the CEO of a corporate entity and a corporate structure that is designed to generate profits, and that is not done by being nice to people and giving people second chances and giving people more rope than you can see reason to give them, and so on and so forth.
Yes. Let's. You touched briefly on Hi-Fi Rush, so let's just drill a little bit further down into Hi-Fi Rush, because obviously that comes from Japan-based Tango Gameworks, and they've also made Evil Within, Ghostwire Tokyo, as you said. But we did have a quote from Matt Booty in regards to Hi-Fi Rush. He said that Hi-Fi Rush will continue to be available to players on the platforms it is today, which is good. And I suppose as a single player game you can download, why would they pull it? It's sort of a different position that Redfall's kind of in. You raised an interesting point about Hi-Fi Rush though before the podcast, and you said that last year there was some questions about whether Hi-Fi Rush actually performed and did as well as they were hoping it did. And I believe that you said there was actually a quote from someone at Xbox that said it not only did it perform, it did better than they thought it did, right?
Yeah, so I can't remember exactly the kind of the events that led up to it, but essentially I think it was an insider somewhere on the internet claimed that Hi-Fi Rush had perhaps, I don't know if he claimed that it had underperformed or that it had missed some of the expectations and targets set for it internally, but there was some kind of scuttlebutt around that kind of thinking, and a lot of Xbox kind of insiders, because there's obviously we operate in this grey area now with Game Pass where a lot of times we're told how many players something reached,
right?
And it's like, well, actually, what is the success?
Free to play on Game Pass.
Quite exactly. Both Redfall and Hi-Fi Rush reached millions of players. That sounds great, but internally, what did they expect? How many units did they want it to sell? How many players did it need to hit just off Game Pass? And so we don't know. And so people were chatting. And it was Aaron Greenberg, I think, who is the VP of marketing over at Xbox, who kind of stepped in to cut through a lot of that conversation, a lot of that chatter, by describing Hi-Fi Rush as a quote-unquote breakout hit that hit quote-unquote all key measurements and expectations for Microsoft last year.
Which then makes
today, the studio's been closed.
Which makes this whole thing that's what's bizarre, because you can kind of say, okay, Arkane, maybe they didn't perform where they wanted to, and it was such a big failure that they felt that they were going to do the restructuring, reprioritize other titles, etc., etc. But for them to do this with Tango Gameworks is after a breakthrough hit. It doesn't really make much sense unless this is less about individual success of specific titles, and it is about taking people with expertise and know-how in certain areas and effectively being like, do you know what? We know where we want you to go. We know what we want to prioritize to make money, and we're going to slice and dice these businesses up, take some people and put them in different places, which I suppose if you're the controlling company, why wouldn't you do that? But at the same time, that really sucks for the people that work at these individual studios and are trying to make these different games, because they're not going to, they don't want to go and make the next Fallout game, or they don't want to maybe go and work on
Right.
Starfield 2 or something like that. They're in the case of Tango Gameworks, they made a very good, very successful by Xbox's own metrics, single player, rhythm based game, which was fantastic. And I'm sure we would have been excited to see another similar thing come out of that studio.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing that's odd about the idea of like potential reshuffling and sort of reorganization of resources around some of these bigger titles is that whilst I believe with Arkane Austin, as we said, that some employees would be realigned to other teams while others would be laid off. I believe with Tango Gameworks, it's just a wholesale shuttering. I don't think there's any reshuffling going on there. Think about like what that means for Xbox. Firstly, Phil Spencer has talked very lovingly and very endearingly about the Japanese market in interviews across a number of years now. Tango was the only Japanese studio that Xbox owned, so they are now back down to zero for that. And the other thing, you want to talk about kind of versatility, a team of people that seem to be able to work on a number of different titles, different genres, can kind of fit into where you need them. We got to remember that Hi-Fi Rush was a game that was built seemingly out of nowhere, in the shadow of Ghostwire Tokyo. They went from literally I think it was less than 1 year apart in terms of release cadence. They went from, a weird like first-person shooter-esque experience, set in a Tokyo at night in the rain with loads of Shiba Inus that you could pet and all that kind of good stuff, to, as you said, this the third-person rhythm action game developed by a whole nother team in a whole nother genre. Like that is like surely the definition or the industry standard for kind of like for flexibility, for resource management, for efficiency, for release cadence, for all these things. And they've just turned their back on all of that. I really kind of can't fathom like how that benefits them. And don't get me wrong, I don't know what their head count was like at Tango Gameworks. I don't know how much money they save, on the kind of when it comes to like the wage bill, for want of a better way of putting it, by letting all those heads roll. I don't know if that Tango Gameworks, like maybe I know they're the head and former founder of Tango had left like not too long ago. Maybe they were struggling with leadership. Maybe internally there was a bit of strife, or they didn't know which direction they were heading. They didn't have a great pitch for what their next big project would be. Like there's all kinds of fuzziness to stories like these that cause us to lead us to not knowing the specifics as to why something happened. But all we can comment on what it's like from the outside looking in, and it just looks weird. But no, not fuck weird. It looks bad.
I think one of the worst things about this is, as well as when we look back at last year, when we were putting together lists of games that we were excited about, that were good, that were surprising, that actually put a smile on your face after, especially with Hi-Fi Rush, because it was a surprise when it was coming out. If you take Hi-Fi Rush out of that mix, you kind of, and it's like, yeah, but that was a real high point at some certain area, times in the year, like when it came out and just before, and so that, and if you take that away, that it just, I don't know, the future for the actual future Xbox game showcases, if you take out those elements, if you take out the Hi-Fi Rushes of this world, then you just narrow down and you do what they're saying, which is reprioritize onto your main franchises, what that really looks like to me is less good stuff to see year after year. And what does that actually mean? Like when you let me give you two final quotes from Xbox, and then I want to ask you one more question about this before we move on. So Matt Booty has clarified that, and he's told staff at Bethesda that Bethesda remains one of the key pillars of Xbox despite all these closures. And then we had a quote from Arkane Leon boss Dinga Bakaba, who has criticised the executives of Microsoft, and he has said that their decision to close several studios, including Arkane Austin, is a fucking gut stab. So I'm glad that he hasn't minced his words when he said that. But there was one of the questions I wanted to ask you, and we sort of we talked about it a bit last week. I believe it was last week. I think it was last week. With the success of Fallout, the Prime TV show, do you think there is an element of this whereby, in a really cack-handed way, Xbox have basically gone, look at all the money that we've, or look how successful that TV show's been. We need to double down on like things like Fallout. We need to double down on our big franchises. Let's forget about the little stuff. Forget about your Hi-Fi Rushes and your Ghostwire Tokyos. Let's focus on the big ticket items. Do you think there's an error of that?
I mean,
I mean, they've said it. They've specifically said that.
Yes,
But you
that's
know
the
what I
thing.
mean? Do you think there's like
I do know what you mean.
yeah.
I I personally hope that the connection between the story that we're discussing now and the success that the Fallout TV show has seen on Amazon Prime, that there's just no connection there whatsoever. I hope that the two things are not remotely linked, because that would make me, my brain would start doing backflips, I think, if there was any kind of connection there. But yeah, like, we can't run away from, like you said, exactly what the quotes here are from Matt Booty. And this isn't Matt Booty communicating with us and members of the public. This was Matt Booty communicating with people who were losing their jobs, and references to prioritizing high impact titles and further investing in Bethesda's portfolio of blockbuster games and beloved worlds. When you're talking about high impact titles, you're talking about titles that like already carry a certain amount of weight with them and so can make a bigger impact on the market. And when you're talking about Bethesda's portfolio of blockbuster games and beloved worlds, you're talking about sequels, right?
Yes.
Or things that exist within an IP or a series that's already been established elsewhere, or made popular, or brought to another level elsewhere, as in the case with Fallout. So there's definitely some of that going on, and that's not exclusive to Xbox. Anyone who kind of kept their ear to the ground this past week will have seen that there were some rather disappointing news stories to emerge with regards to what happened with Vicarious Visions, and sort of the reason that they didn't end up making a Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 and 4 remake, and the fact that they, like so many other Activision studios, got folded into essentially being Call of Duty support studios, because someone at Activision, kept looking at the numbers and kept looking at the spreadsheets that people, over at the finance department or whatever it was were creating, and said, actually, like, yes, it won us some goodwill. Yes, it sold a couple of million units, but it makes way more sense having these people helping the next Call of Duty either come out faster or be bigger or be better or have more additional content or so on and so forth than it does to have them make a game. And I'm sure there's some of that going on here. And not only is that a bummer because it makes the games industry less interesting, it means that we as gamers have less to play and the things that we are playing
Yes.
are more familiar. It also just feels like a weird betrayal of what I thought or hoped Xbox were kind of doing, or the direction they were heading, with the acquisitions that they were making and with services like Game Pass. Every time the summer period rolled around, we had another Summer Game Fest or E3 or whatever it was. Like, I feel like we always had the same conversation where, is this going to be the showcase or the live stream where Xbox really kind of like reveal their hand, and all the studios that they've been acquiring now for so long, like some of these earlier acquisitions really do go quite far back now if you actually run it back and go and watch those announcements of various E3s over the years. Is this going to be the one where, like, oh, they've got a massive portfolio, they're making PlayStation look kind of stupid because all these studios that they bought have now been able to make their magnum opus because they've been enabled by Microsoft to go out and take the time and take the money and the resources that, everything that it costs to make this game. And the evidence of today is that that was always something of a fallacy, and that that these over time, if this becomes a trend, these Xbox showcases are going to get more and more routine, and we're going to have to get used to seeing series and franchises that we're familiar with that have previous entries that have sold millions of units, and they're just going to come out slightly faster. If anything, this is in some respects, the fear is, the worst case scenario is that this is, Tango, Gameworks and Arkane Austin, all this stuff, like all the slate and the portfolio being streamlined so that there's a larger emphasis or an increased ability to get the next big Bethesda RPG out the door slightly faster, or make it more of the focus when it does come to being released. And like I said, I think that's a weird betrayal of not necessarily a promise that Xbox or anyone there, including Phil Spencer, ever actually made, but the promise of what it felt like Xbox were heading towards, and what it felt like being a Game Pass subscriber and someone who backed that initiative was all about. And like, to reference something that I mentioned to you before we went live, I'd be fascinated to know what it feels like to be at a studio like Ninja Theory right now, who are working on Hellblade 2 and are at this point weeks away from releasing what could very easily be a critically acclaimed mid-sized game that attracts millions of players, and in the exact same month that Xbox have sent a very clear message saying, doing that and doing that well doing that well to the point where you can be nominated for awards at the Game Awards and reach 6 million players is still not enough to keep your fucking studio,
Right.
let alone your jobs. I don't know what message that sends to other Xbox studios, but I'm glad I'm not one of them. Fucking hell.
No, well said. Very well said. But hey, let's move on from there, because the message I want to send right now is that we will always support the people that support us. And I'm, of course, talking about our Patreons who support us over at patreon.com/SuperShow. There are some amazing people that week after week support us, keep the lights on, keep us coming back. You can join our Discord server on the lowest rank of our Patreon. It's $2 a month, or you can go for maybe a higher tier and you can see some extra content that we have got kicking around as well. There are some people's names on screen right now. And I would just like to give a shout out to all of these people because they are amazing and incredible. But I would like to give a special shout out to Aaron Cameron, Athletic Gravy, Brimstone, Ice Knock Rock Salt, Jesper Camdown Nielsen, Pastors Guild, Zander GTI, and the big dogs, the members of the board, the ones who will never be shuttered. It is Brett Z, aka Shellshock, Geometric Potter, Hacksaw Book Read, Manuel Guerrero, and Peaswad. So thank you guys. Thank you once again for all your support. Week in and week out, it really does mean a lot. Right now, Jamie, though,
yeah,
I would like to know about Stellar Blade.
I think I told you all you need to know at the beginning of the podcast, Jonesy. I've been masturbating furiously. My right arm has doubled in size.
Glasses on, glasses off. Pearl earrings.
I've been pearl earrings. I see. She was, funnily enough, she wasn't wearing any when I started. Yeah, no, I've been mixing and matching, which is actually weirdly true to my actual Stellar Blade experience. I have been mixing and matching her outfit a little bit. Not as much as some people on my friends list, because I think there is a trophy for, essentially, the way the outfits work in the game is you kind of like, you almost find the outfit in as a collectible, and then you make it using other consumables.
Okay.
And I think there's a trophy for developing, for want of a better way of putting it, 10 different outfits, and I've seen some people on my friends list have already got that, and I was sat there on I've got 3 because I had the starter one, I made the first one I found just to kind of see how the system worked, and I made the first one I liked after that. And no, it's not the one with all the side, but where everything's hanging out. There's there's an underboob.
Is it the outfits? Do they have any narrative relevance?
Not that I can tell, no.
Right.
They do have descriptors. They do. Each one has kind of a little blurb that I guess probably offers some in-universe explanation for maybe how Eve came to be wearing it. But as far as I can tell, no, there's no reason why you should be running around in the sewers and just find some weird, essentially a schematic for a weird cat suit with loads of underboob. That's and everything's designed so that she's wearing some kind of stockings and gloves and all that kind of stuff. But there is one kind of, I want to say there's one fourth wall-ish breaking message fairly early on that kind of just acknowledges hey, if you're going to, fight Naytibas, you might as well look good doing it. So,
right.
Have fun. And for them to kind of acknowledge away from the kind of the universe of the game, hey, change the length of her ponytail, give her glasses and earrings, and all these kind of things. Yeah, that's kind of fun. And to be fair, the haircuts and the hair colors, they have an in-universe explanation because there is a hairdresser in the one of the game's hubs. That you can do a side mission for, and then he becomes your hairdresser. Josie, what if I were to tell you, tell me if you're picking up a theme here, that the hub that I chose not to mention just then, which is the kind of the last city left for, the last remaining remnants of humanity have all kind of come together in this one city. What if I were to tell you that it was called Zion?
Oh, it's not really, is it?
It's called, spelled with an X, but it's called Zion. And what if I were to tell you that there were a sort of a security force of sorts who operate within Zion, and they're referred to as the Sentinels? And what if I were to tell you that you fast travel from location to location using telephone booths?
What?
would you be beginning to wonder what one of the many potential sources of Stellar Blade's inspiration came from?
Well, so if you'd have just said it was Zion and that it was protected by sentinels, I would have maybe assumed that there is some kind of like biblical attack thing that this.
I mean, yes, which there is.
But when you throw in the phone booths, which I'm pretty sure there weren't many of those knocking around in biblical times, it starts to get a little bit weird. And maybe they've watched too much Matrix.
Yes. Which, for the record, I don't think is the one. I think that's a bad thing. Two, I almost don't think that is a thing. Too much Matrix. I think it's possible to watch that too many times. But of course, you're right. The lines are blurred because the Matrix itself was heavily inspired by kind of like a lot of various religious allegories, that are included in its naming kind of choices specifically, and that's something that Stellar Blade is very upfront about. When, as we discussed after the demo, two of the first characters you meet are Adam and Eve.
Yes.
Stellar Blade is not a game, as you might have gathered from its sort of costume design and character design, is not a game that deals very much in sort of like nuance.
Not much subtlety.
Very much like. Yeah, subtlety is not the name of the game. They know what they're going for and they know what they're inspired by, and they said we love the Matrix, we love the Bible, we love Near Automata and questions about whether or not automatons are real people and so on and so forth. But we are going to handle that with none of the grace of any of the things that inspired us. It's just going to be It's like that meme from Garth Marenghi, like subtext is for cowards or whatever it is. It's like, yeah, it's all text.
Fair enough.
But yeah, that's the world, and you and I picked up, I think, even just in the hour or so of gameplay that the demo provided, that this wasn't a game that some people might be drawn to for its world and for its characters and for its storytelling, its narrative chops, but I think most people wouldn't be. And I can tell you, after about 10 to 12 hours of playing it, I'm not amongst those people. I think the writing is often bad and somehow made even worse by what is some pretty dull and flat delivery. The voice acting is sort of wildly inconsistent, where some people, I don't know what the direction was. Certainly, it's presented in English language first and foremost. I didn't know you got an option to switch. Like, with the Like a Dragon games, I played it in Japanese, and you just kind of enjoy everything that everyone says because Japanese sounds awesome. Stellar Blade, I just went with English, and again, I don't know what the direction was, but some people sound like it's almost like there were two voice directors,
Right.
and some people, one of them told some of the performers, sound like you couldn't be less interested about the world that you inhabit or the things you have to do therein, and others were told pretend you're in an anime, or worse yet, pretend you're in like some weird hentai thing, like utterly bizarre. And that's kind of off-putting. It's one of, I think, of a number of different off-putting things about Stellar Blade as a package, and yet it is incredibly fun to play. And that is because its strengths are incredibly strong and only get stronger as you kind of progress and become more familiar with its systems and have access to more of Eve's abilities and more of the world and more of the exploration. And you can kind of see the many ways in which it branches out from that kind of the opening that you and I had played a couple of weeks ago. It's really going to be one of those things where I think everyone's going to, everyone's going to exist somewhere on this spectrum between the extent to which the elements of the game that you enjoy can outweigh the elements of the game that you don't. The extent to which how much you're having fun engaging with the combat and getting into the nitty gritty of the parry system or the various dodges and so on and so forth. And in the boss battles, for example, are great. How much you're kind of won over by that, and how much you're going to use that to leverage the fact that like the narrative is really rather at times poorly put together, at other times incomprehensible, and that its primary flaw is that you as a player and as the person trying to engage with this narrative are strung along by, like I said, like the least interesting characters perhaps of any game released this entire year. So much of this game is really rather drab, and yet you'll come across this incredible boss fight, and you kind of have to tip your hat to the developers and the work that has gone into some of the fundamentals, some of the principles of the game. And I totally understand that some people put far more weight in those principles than they do any of the kind of the stuff that exists around the edges. You know, like the quality of the voice acting, for example. No one's going to drop a game for poor voice acting quality if they think they're experiencing some of the best combat they've felt in a third-person action game, you know, in years, for example.
Yes.
And I think that's the kind of the chord that Stellar Blade is striking with a lot of players right now.
So here's the question: how much heavy lifting is Eve's character design doing in this game?
Oh God, it's really doing none. Like for me,
Okay,
and that's not just because it's not my way of saying, "Oh, look at me, I'm not a freak," but it's like.
No, but I think it's important. It's you could, because you can end up sometimes with games that have one element which is really good, and the rest of the game you don't necessarily notice how bad it is because the one element is doing so much of the work. But no, yes, it's good to hear that that's not the case with Stellar Blade. It's a good game anyway.
It's a good game anyway. It would be as good a game if she was a bloke, and you know, or any other kind of like version of that. You know, any other hypothetical you can imagine in your head. You know, the character model and the discussions that have been had around it really, you know, have little to no bearing whatsoever on the game itself. My enjoyment of the game, and I'm sure many others' enjoyment of the game. There are some people who, you know, move the camera directly underneath Eve when she's climbing up a ladder. Yes, there are those people out there. Have I done that? Yes, I have done that because like there's
Everyone's
something about
gonna.
that angle that it's
You're
like,
gonna try it.
like there's just something really. There's something about the way and you know, I'm not going to be explicit, but there's something about the way Eve climbs ladders that from a certain angle you're like, that's kind of fascinating. I wish this game had longer ladders. I want the ladder from Snake Eater instead of Blade. That's my DLC. But it's like there's no in-universe explanation for it. It's not referenced to it's not, you know, it's not a facet of the game itself. There aren't, you know, male characters that appear that are fawning over Eve or asking her why her tits are falling out. It's just there.
It's just there.
And it's just there. And you know what? I think just because I'm slightly concerned that a lot of what I said might be, you know, kind of coming out net negative, and people might be slightly confused that I'm continuing to play this game and having a good time with it. I also just want to give props to Shift Up because, and I don't want to get too much into the nitty gritty of like, oh, this is like a rarity for the industry and like kind of the state of video games 101. But another thing that Stellar Blade is a you know, a new title, a AAA title from a studio that had no prior experience making games for, you know, home consoles. I think, yeah, they'd worked on the mobile market before, but even then, you know, not to a great extent. And it's come out the gates, and it's extremely good looking. It's extremely polished. You know, there's no kind of like noticeable rough edges. There's no nastiness in terms of, you know DLC or microtransactions or any of the other things that people like to get worked up about. It's just a solid product that it delivers kind of as expected. You get good value for money. You know, it's a fairly long game. It's incredibly ambitious, and in some respects, I think, you know, them for their ambition and their ability to kind of follow through on that ambition, and Sony for recognizing that ambition and to a certain extent, you know, backing them. I don't think we'll ever know the ins and outs of how much Sony supported, but, you know, I'm sure there was some money involved. We certainly know that, you know, XDev was involved in supporting. And, you know, for us to get a game that looks good out the gate, a game that runs well out of the gate, you know, there are 3 separate performance modes designed for, you know, various different setups, and each of them, you know, perform as expected. I just think that that's commendable, and it's easy to forget when something comes out this fully formed that we're talking about essentially a first-time studio. I think that's really what Shift Up technically are, and we're used to giving first-time studios a pat on the back when they make really, you know, inventive or delightful small indie games, and it's easy to forget that when you're looking at something like Stellar Blade because it doesn't feel like it. But it is a first-time studio. They should be commended for their work. They should be commended for nailing the landing. And I'm excited to see kind of for where they go next. It's also just on as a little side thing, a great win for, you know, the Korean games industry, which is, you know, not known for its work again in the home console market, a massive video game industry in its own right, but totally dominated like almost, I think, like 98.5% of the revenue generated by the Korean games industry is done. It comes from the PC and mobile markets. And so again, just kind of another little interesting sort of like footnote on what is a very solid game that I think most people can probably take a look at, especially if you play the demo for, and have a pretty solid grasp of whether or not it's their kind of thing. And it did end up being for me, in spite of some of my initial reservations, and in spite of the fact that the negatives are there for just about anyone to see.
Yeah. No, I don't think you made it sound negative at all. I think you made it sound. I'm surprised at how more positive you sounded than I thought you were going to be, having not talked about it before.
Yeah, I'm digging it more than I thought I would. Like I was a bit. I stand by everything I said about that demo. I really do. But playing it is fun. That's just, and I guess when that's the bottom line with the video game, there's really not much else that need be said. Everything else is kind of like, it's peripheral.
There is one more thing that needs to be said though. I did say I would do a little bit of research.
You did
about Stellar Blade, and I would because we obviously had all the discussion. And I'm going to keep this really brief because it's sort of been and gone. But yes, I did watch some of the controversy videos to see whether or not I thought that there actually was censorship when it came to Stellar Blade. I came down on the side that it is not censorship. Effectively, okay. I can see why some people think it is, and I can see why it all kicked off. And I'm going to put these two things together. So when the game released, just before it released, they put out some promotional materials where they effectively said uncensored, right? And they were saying that the game was going to release the same all over the world, and they were using this graphic like uncensored, and they were getting everyone excited about that. It then appears that on release, the disc version of the game was patched from a version that had specifically, I think the main patch addressed one of the costumes that Eve wears, which is like the bunny suit. I think it's called like the day bunny suit, which has like a plunging neckline and some side boob, and it has a really high cut crotch. And so what they had done is they added a modesty panel across the boobs, and they added a wider crotch so that it wasn't quite as high cut. So on the disc, if you put that in and you had no update and you got that outfit, you would get no modesty panel, high crotch. They did an update which then changed that, which actually meant, so that was the game. So that I think was why people are going censorship. And there was another costume which was originally put out. There was a costume which didn't have tights, or what Americans would call pantyhose, under it. It just had like a lot of leg and some side boob, and before release, before the disc had even the disc version, they'd added in these tights into this outfit, and so I think that's why people are saying censorship. But I think when it boils down to it, this is a developer, Shift Up, making a game for Sony Entertainment, or Sony Interactive Entertainment. As far as I'm concerned, they're the client at that point, and they're going to put this game out onto their platform. And I work for a company that we do this all day long. You have to make something which the client are happy with and you are happy with. And there are conversations around how far you're going to push certain elements. And at the end of the day, even if Eve was wearing like pasties and nipple tassels and like nothing else, there is still a level of nudity within video games that Sony are going to have to like decide whether they're happy with. And I think that the line that Shift Up had was just slightly outside of where Sony were comfortable. This is why I don't think this is censorship at all. I think this is purely developers making a game for a publisher, and the publisher said, "Yeah, we love it. We just want a little less of the little less boob here, a little less crotch there." And I think this is wrangling that happens throughout the game industry on every single game you've ever played, or even if it's language, if it's violence. I think that the real tricky factor with this is that some of the shots, the presentation shots, were before some of these edits were made.
Right.
So what I boiled down to, it wasn't censorship at all. It was Sony just not quite agreeing with where the line should be drawn. And I think that's perfectly up to Sony to decide.
What would you say, though, to someone that heard your explanation just there and said, yes, but Jonesy, you still described censorship, no matter what the reasoning for it is?
So censorship is not, I don't think that's censorship. What I would say censorship is an external third party telling you can't do something. I wouldn't, like, if I'm Sony and I'm paying for this, and I'm putting it out on my platform, I'm not censoring you. I'm telling you what I'm happy. This is any company putting anything out ever. So regard when you're making a movie and the director wants to make a movie and they have a vision. If the exec producers are not happy with something because they're like, this is going to mean that my film's not going to do as well. That's not censorship. That is like consideration of like of what you're putting out. And everyone does this. Literally every company I've ever worked for at every point has a line. And if Sony's line is not quite aligned with where Shift Up were thinking, I don't see. Like, for example, like in what I do every day, we're not allowed any swearing at all in anything we put out because the client who pay for everything, they are like, that's not on brand. Swearing isn't on brand. They don't like any alcohol in anything we do at all in any situation purely because it's not on brand. So for me, I'm like, that's not censorship. I'm not being censored as an editor, and my team isn't being censored for the content we're making. It is purely that we are trying to fit the client's brand. And so to my mind, that this is the same thing. Shift Up and making the content, sure. Sony have a brand.
Sure. But even in your line of work,
yes.
if you're trying to if you have to make changes to appease a brand, if you have to say, if you had to remove a swear word and you were referring to that process, just casually, anecdotally in the office, and someone said, "Hey, boss, should I blank this?" What word do you think they would use to describe their actions? They wouldn't say, "Should I mosaic this?" or "Should I mute this?" They would say, "Should I censor this?"
We'd never use the word censor. No, I've never ever heard that in that context in what I do. It's always like, do you know what it is? It's outside of guardrails. That's how it's said. That is literally the phrase used. Outside, it falls outside of client guardrails because the guardrails exists to keep everything inside on brand with where we're happy. And so I completely understand why some people, especially with the weird thing is that because there was a version on the disc which was then edited by a patch, I think that does seem like that absolutely seems like censorship.
It implies that it passed certification, right?
It implies that it was signed off, that it was all okay, and that something happened post it being post everything being certified, that something happened. I think that's where it gets tricky, and I do understand why people have said censorship. And I could be totally wrong. This isn't me saying this is the truth. This is me saying this is my opinion of why this occurred. I think it's because the brand, the on brand for Sony, they were like, I know. I couldn't help but think in my mind, I wonder if it's like they're thinking if a 17-year-old is playing this at home and their mum walks in, how close to like sexually explicit does it have to be before your mum is going to go, turn this off, or your mum's going to go, oh, what's that? Okay.
But then the part that's strange about that is that Stellar Blade, as is already a game that mums are going to walk in and go, what is that?
There's always a line. There's always a line, absolutely.
Stellar Blade is a game that I have had to think twice about. What am I going to say when my flatmate comes into my room, sees this on my screen, and goes, "What are you playing?" Like it already is that game, whether it's been censored or not. So,
but like, that's what
modesty panels in a game where, like, I've already got a ludicrous amount of underboob, and I've already got a weird like glow up heart symbol right on my what, and everything's already skin tight, and I'm already in stockings, and I'm already, exploding these weird alien creatures into piles of guts. Like the idea that they were like, "Hey, one last thing on this project you've been working on for 5 years, just one like less side boob on this one outfit." It doesn't seem worth the.
No, but again, I would not be surprised because again, I've had these exact conversations. I imagine that what happened was Sony said, make these 50 edits to the models to the game models because we think they're too risque. And then Shift Up would have come back and said, come on, this isn't that bad. Look at this game, look at this example. You've let this kind of thing through before. Like, remember Silent and what she was wearing in Metal Gear Solid 5. Like, you've had this, and then quiet, not silent.
But it means the exact same thing. So.
There would have been this little back and forward because I've had those discussions, and then you sort of like you end up saying, well, how about we make this change? How about we tweak that? How about we leave this? How about we leave that? And because what you're trying to do, I think, at the end of the day, is you're going to have Shift Up are pushing that line that Sony are probably happy with, and Sony are giving a little, but but then they probably have their red lines, and that's why I think you end up with like modesty panel kind of wider crotch things, because they probably had 10 other things that would have been changed, but they managed to get them, and then managed to, no, let's keep that. All right, how about if we put her in tights and she can wear that outfit? And they're like, oh, okay. But again, for me, the big overarching thing is I don't think it's censorship, because I don't think it's like an external body that have said this is not puritanical, like this is bad morals. To me, it's a brand who are saying, like, if this game released outside, if this was independently published, or if this was published by a secondary publisher who picked up a game and put it out, there'd be no changes. They would have just said, oh yeah, this game's fine. But I think when you have a brand who have to put their name on it, and especially one like as big as Sony, I think that that's what they're thinking about. And I'm sorry, I've talked about this for way too long. I don't want to take anyone's time.
No. It is interesting. It is interesting.
And for the reasons that you said, that's why I don't think it's censorship, because there are so many instances where it's like, but if you were going to get off to this, if that was your aim and that's what you were really thinking, there are so many skimpy outfits she's wearing. So why have they made these tweaks? How have they?
You
why
still
have they
could get off to it. You're still going to get weird looks from your roommates and your parents. Like, yeah.
There is. I saw a tweet this week of someone. There was a life-size model of Eve, like proportionate life-size model of Eve made somewhere, and I was like, "Damn, that's it." If someone said, "Oh, I've got to get rid of this statue, what am I going to do with it?" Be like, "It can live in my house. It's absolutely fine."
Yeah. So what would be weird about a life-size sort of proportionate like model of Eve is, I think you'd realise, and this is a couple of the thing I've noted a few times already in the game, is just how high up her legs come. I don't know where her hips and waist are relative to a human being.
She's got heels on. She's got crazy heels on, though.
And she all her suits have. Well, sometimes there's not actually a physical heel. It's just like her feet are arched in the way they would be if she were wearing like extremely high heels. But all the suits that I've seen thus far appear to have some kind of like heel-like design built into them. Yes.
There you go.
Which great. Hey, the other thing though, Jonesy, I haven't finished the story, and much like you mentioned Quiet and Hideo Kojima's protests at the time when people first told him, "Hey, she shouldn't be naked all the time." Maybe we too will once again come to feel ashamed of our words and deeds when we learn the real reason for why Eve either looks the way she does, or why she was patched up in the way she was. Who knows?
But yeah, but there you go. I'm not saying anyone's right or wrong. I'm saying that's my take on the what I saw. But there we go.
Jonesy's take. It's a hot new segment on the Super Show podcast. 2 weeks after the furore around a certain subject has died down, Jonesy's going to wade back in with his hot takes.
And hot take, which is lukewarm takes. That's what it's going to be.
Yes. Tune in next week for Jonesy's hot takes on the Escape from Tarkov DLC.
I've got a couple of things that I was going to mention, and I'll be super quick. I'll just say that I've been checking out Dopesick. I hadn't watched it yet, and finally got around to watching it and thoroughly enjoying it. I think it's very good. I'm like halfway through at the moment. I also watched something else. I should say, in case people don't know, Dopesick is the sort of semi historically accurate, but not, I guess, like dramatized thing around OxyContin and Purdue Pharma and all that shit that went on in America a few years ago.
It always feels weird to use the word historical about something that didn't happen that long ago, but I know what you mean.
Yeah. It's, I don't know the word to use apart from that. The dramatized story of whatever. But no, it's very good. Rosario Dawson's in it, if you didn't need any other reason.
Oh, now I know why you're watching it.
No, that isn't the reason. That is not the reason. But, you know, if you're going to put like one of the most attractive women in the whole world into a TV show, then it's going to help.
Also in it is the Last of Us Series 2's Abby. I don't know if you've come across that character yet or how big a role she actually plays in it, but Caitlin Dever is in that show.
Oh, is she?
Yes.
Is it Caitlin with a K or a C?
Caitlin with a K. She plays a character called Betsy Malum.
Is that her?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You probably didn't recognize her because she's not a post-apocalyptic, jacked-up weirdo, but she didn't have a golf club in her hands. That's
interesting.
Abby.
Interesting.
How does that change things? With regards to, I guess, The Last of Us more so than Dopesick.
Like, she very good actress. I think she's very good in Dopesick. I could see. So she does play kind of like she's a miner, as in she digs in the mine. She's mining.
I was
As
gonna
not a
say,
young
like,
kid.
yeah.
So she works in the mines. So she's they've obviously she's not some like a frail little thing. So maybe they can get her jacked and she's going to look the part. I would just say she doesn't look at what I'd imagine Abby looks like.
Yeah, and I've got a feeling based on the filming going on at the moment that she's not going to be jacked in The Last of Us either. She's going to look very much like the version of her that you've just seen.
Oh, okay. Which is surprising to me because one thing I liked about the Abby character, I know people got up in arms about where'd she get her roids from, but I like the fact that she was pretty stacked. I think that's because I get annoyed when you have a film and you've got someone like, not calling her out, she's a very good actress, but you have someone like Charlize Theron. I can't remember the name of the film I'm thinking of in particular.
Monster.
No. She plays a super spy. I think it's Atomic Blonde. I think.
Oh yeah, Atomic Blonde, sure.
And she has a fight with some dude who's like 6'4", has got to be 300 pounds, and she like beats him up hand to hand. And I'm like, no, she's there's just not enough of her. And I like it when they put in a character, which is why I think when Ronda Rousey or Gina Carano were in action films, it was wicked because they looked like they could kick the crap out of any of the dudes they came across. And I like that, which is why I was kind of hoping they did the Abby thing. And I like they did it. Anyway.
Because, you have a massive problem when it comes to suspension of disbelief.
I do sometimes.
In your zombie apocalypse TV shows.
Yes. It's why Rocky was good because the angles they shot made Stallone look like he wasn't 5'5". They did a good job of making him look like he could actually have a fight with Ivan Drago, which of course in real life would have looked hilarious. But good directing. Stallone.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Just if you apple crates hidden here and there, if you
it works.
A few very subtle camera angles, and you're halfway there.
Yeah, exactly. I will also mention an old game that I played, but I will mention it because I haven't touched VR for a while. So I got the HTC Vive out and I downloaded Moss Book 1 and 2. And just again, every time I do that, and especially with a game like Moss, I was playing it. Got it through Steam on sale. I can't remember how much it was for parts 1 and 2, but what a charming VR game. That sort of fixed perspective of you, the viewer, in VR and seeing the little mouse run around the 3D level in front of you is like, it blows me away every time. Every time I play that kind of platformer game in VR, I find it to be one of the best implementations of VR, because it's you can look at it on the 2D screen in front of you. Everyone else can see the game you're playing and go like, oh, it looks like quite a mediocre 2D 3D platformer. And then when you put that headset on, suddenly you are transported to this fantastical world. It looks amazing, and it's phenomenal.
I think we both experienced it as well with Astrobot Rescue Mission on PSVR. It's like
absolutely,
somehow the third-person platformer is able to create one of like the biggest disparities between the experience you think you're going to get having played them traditionally in on a flat screen to the experience you do get in VR.
Yes, actually, and it's funny because I said to my wife, I was like, "You have to try this." I was like, "It's incredible." And I've got an old headset, and this is an old game, so it's older, not old, but not new game. And I was like, "You've got to try this." And she sort of put it on, and she was trying it, and she's not done VR for a while. And I was like, stroke the mouse. You can like reach out and stroke him. And she was there trying to like stroke him. Like, no, actually physically reach your hand to where the mouse is and touch it. And she was like, oh, okay. And then she's given him a little scratch, and then he does a little like shimmy when you give him a little scratch on the head. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's nice. There's that kind of interactivity that helps sell VR games as well.
Yeah, it really does. I think those, though, I want to play more of those. If I ever have a proper VR,
they just need to make more.
They do need to make more, and I always get funny talking about VR because I know we have people in our audience who play a lot more than I do and spend more time in VR, and they are much more engaged and have their finger on the pulse and will tell me that I don't know enough what I'm talking about. But every time I get into VR, I'm like, I just want more high end, like good quality VR games and stories. And for me, actually, a big thing nowadays is like seated VR. I'm less inclined to go for like a room scale. And if you can get me a good implementation of a seated VR, then it's much easier.
I mean, PSVR 2, dare I say?
I'm tempted. I really am tempted. We'll see. Yeah. Let's come back to me in the future and we'll see how I'm getting on with that.
Yes. Jonesy, I know that this is extremely unorthodox as we are currently live on YouTube, but I need to desperately go and visit the little boy's room. And this is something that has never happened to me in however many years of podcasting. And so I don't actually know what the protocol is for it. What do you reckon?
You go. I'll keep the audience entertained with my electric
Okay.
personality.
Sounds good. I'll be back in a second.
All right. Oh no! Now there's two of me. This is weird. As Jamie is gone, you're going to have to suffer two of me at the same time. I also have nothing to talk about. I was going to talk about the next story we're going to touch on, but I don't really want to talk about that because Jamie won't be here to hear me. I'll tell you what I will say. In case anyone hasn't watched it yet, I've just got done with watching the first part of Clarkson's Farm, Season 3. If you haven't checked out the rest of it, I strongly recommend it. It's on Prime if you are into that kind of thing. It's Jeremy Clarkson running a farm in the UK called Diddley Squat and all the trials and tribulations that he has. So I think there's a part 2 to Season 3 coming out in... I think it comes out in 3 days on the 10th of May. I didn't think I'd be into it. I'm not much of a farmer. I've played a little bit of Farm Simulator, but I strongly recommend it. Seeing, that side of life and all the crap that goes into being a farmer is very interesting. And like I said, it's only just come out. I was late to the party with Clarkson's Farm. I only watched season 1 and 2. A month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago. And so I was quite happy when it turned out that I was going to get to hop on season 3 pretty soon because seasons in the UK don't seem to be very long. I want to say it's like 8 episodes per season, which obviously isn't that long. So yeah, do yourself a favour, check out some Clarkson's Farm, watch him raise some sheep, mess around with pigs. It can get a bit emotional at times when animals don't do well. So be warned. Trigger warning for sad animal deaths, especially in season 3. But the rest of it is enjoyable. Very good. I liked it. All right, I'm not going to bore you anymore with that. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll set up the next story that we're going to touch on because obviously Jamie already knows about it, and then we can sort of we can dive into it a little bit more. We're going to be talking about Helldivers 2 and the roller coaster week that developers Arrowhead Games and again Sony have had following the implementation of the requirement for PC users to have a PlayStation Networks account, which I must admit I didn't know about because I'm playing on PlayStation, so it's not something that I've thought about. I actually know someone who plays on PC and plays Helldivers 2, so I'll have to speak to him about how annoying this actually would have been. But so effectively, Sony announced the Helldivers 2 would soon require players to sign in with a PlayStation Network account. It was something that was going to be required at the time of launch on PC, but it's something that was removed because of technical issues, and so PC players had got away without having to use a PSN account when they were playing Helldivers. But the requirement was going to return. It was coming back, and it was supposed to be coming back on May 30th. Which obviously is about 3-4 weeks away at this point. And people were not happy, to say the least. I don't want to say any more, because like I said, Jamie's not back yet. But I suppose I could... this is a weird one for me. I get really frustrated when I'm asked to sign in on things with other accounts, purely because I don't like the idea that I'm being... It's not like the idea of being tracked. It's just like, why? Why do you need my email? Why do you need my personal details? Why, in some respects, do you need my phone number? Like, I don't mind logging in and signing up. It's when you want me to connect other accounts, especially when it comes to you want me to log in with a PSN account and I'm not on PlayStation. I don't really see why that's necessary. Maybe that's just naive because, like, if you want to sign up to Xbox Game Pass, you need to sign up to that. That's signing up to Xbox or with a Microsoft account at the very least. But okay, yeah, I think got someone right now in the chat who knows what I'm talking about. But I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to talk any more about it until Jamie's back. I should have asked him what it was going to be, if it was going to be a 1 or a 2, how long, and I could gauge how long he's going to be. before he returns on the toilet. Hey, any questions or comments in chat, help me out, and we'll riff on something else while we're waiting for Jamie before we get too far into this Helldivers 2 conversation. I actually played some Helldivers 2 yesterday. I was telling Jamie before the podcast, it is the first... I want to say it's the first time I'd played Helldivers and started to feel like it was the repetition was setting in a little bit. I was playing with on a public match. Wasn't playing with anyone I knew. There was no one on voice chat, and it was running a little long in the tooth. Like I was starting to struggle a little bit with. I think after like 3 or 4 matches, it was just a case of like, oh, okay, we're going to do one of these again. So I don't know if my time with Helldivers will be done anytime soon. I wouldn't be surprised if sort of give it a month or two maybe. That I will. And it's nothing to do with PSN. Obviously, I'm playing on PlayStation. So there we go. Yeah, Jamie, you're killing me, mate. It's taking so long in the toilet. Muskie, he's got a massive house. He hasn't. That was a joke. All right. Well, let me see. What else can I touch on before? Oh, okay. So this was the quote coming in from PlayStation as to why they wanted PC players to sign in with a PSN. They said, "This is our main way to protect players from griefing and abuse by enabling the banning of players that engage in that type of behaviour. It also allows those players that have been banned the right to appeal." I suppose like that's fair enough if they want to protect players from griefing and abuse, and if they've logged in with their PSN account, then they can, they've got access to that person, they can ban them. But then if you're logging in, if you're on the game server, if you're on Steam, then you're logging in with your Steam account. So why you can't just... Yeah, there he is. I was just silent the entire time.
Bollocks! I could hear you as I was walking back through the room.
You got me.
What did I miss?
I started to touch on Helldivers 2. I've just given the sort of the first little rundown about the story that we're going to be talking about and what's been going on with the PSN account.
Let me tell you, James. Speaking of Helldivers, speaking of dropping in hot, you should have seen some of the action that was just hell diving out of me.
I'm really glad I didn't. I'm glad you didn't have a microphone, a radio mic that could have
actually that could have been an extra little bonus for the listeners of the pod. I could have just taken my mic with me. I was calling in all kinds of stratagems, let me tell you.
Lovely. All right. Anyway, Helldivers 2. Okay, so I've given these sort of very basics, and I've given the quote from PlayStation that said this was our main way to protect players from griefing, etc., etc. I tell you what, let me give you the rest of the story and then we'll get into it, okay?
Sure.
So developers Arrowhead were forced to apologise after there was a massive backlash from PC players, often those in countries where the PCN service itself was unavailable, because obviously that meant that they weren't going to be able to carry on playing Helldivers 2, which is a non-starter. If you want to play a game and then you can't play the game because where you are won't let you log into a PSN account, madness. The game also went from having a very positive review on Steam to having over 100,000 negative reviews in less than 48 hours because people were like looking down the barrel of this change occurring. Sony appeared to be leading the push as they doubled down on their decision, making the game unavailable for purchase in over 150 regions, which is kind of insane to sort of say that it was so important that people were logging in with PSN accounts. Meanwhile, Steam began issuing refunds for the game, regardless of playtime, because obviously as people were finding out that this was going to be a requirement, they were not happy. Valve have a very good refund policy already, but obviously thought they need to double down on that in order to allow people out. An Arrowhead CEO, John Pilstead, who claimed to who understood the backlash, claimed to be talking to PlayStation about possible solutions, with community managers facing death threats for their handling of the situation, which is insane. Don't give people death threats for any reason, like online. There is in real life. There's no reason, is there? That's absolutely crazy.
No, never.
But anyway, on Monday, after all of this has happened, after everything's gone crazy, Monday, PlayStation delivered a U-turn and they scrapped their plans to require PSN. They have said, Helldivers fans, we've heard your feedback on Helldivers 2 account linking update. The May the 6th update, which would have required Steam and PlayStation Network account linking for new players and for current players being May 30th, will not be moving forward. We're still learning what is best for PC players, and your feedback has been invaluable. Thanks again for your continued support of Helldivers 2, and we'll keep you updated on future plans. Jamie, what level of shit show was this, and was it fair enough that the PC players were that aggy, or should they just suck it up and sign up to PSN?
Okay. In terms of what level of shit show it reached, it got pretty high up there. Especially when you consider that PlayStation aren't always the most popular brand amongst gamers for a variety of different reasons, and Helldivers 2 appeared to have been just one of the more unanimously positive things that PlayStation had put out into the world, not just this year, but also almost of any year. And for them to be kind of like fucking up the one big win that they had in 2024 so far seemed... Well, on the one hand, it seemed very appropriate for PlayStation, but on the other hand, it was just utterly bizarre. You just wondered why they risked it. There was a part of them, maybe as a result of the fact that this was kind of like a requirement that had technically been there since launch, it just hadn't been enforced. Maybe there was a part of them that underestimated just how big the backlash would be. But I think one thing we all know about the internet nowadays, when it comes to a community gathering together and people throwing their voices together in one collective cause, is you're not just directly communicating with the players who are most affected by something like this. You're dealing with the players who need something to get angry about on behalf of those other players. How many of the Steam reviews were from people who were in the Philippines and were like, "You've just stopped me playing my favorite game of the year. That fucking sucks." Whether it's a guy who's like, it's my right as a consumer to not have one more account that I have to log into, but some people were definitely, using this as a reason to get the pitchforks out, and that's fine. I'm not saying that it's nothing. I'm not saying that people should like roll over and just instantly create a PSN account and just shut up and get on with it. I'm not suggesting that at all. But there is also a part of it that's like I said, there's a part of me that just feels like some people just want to get the pitchforks out. They want to be angry. They're looking for a cause. They want to throw their weight behind. And this was one of them. That being said, like when it got to the fact that we were talking about countries where PSN is unavailable, and even people at Arrowhead were like, I think there was one particular community manager who was like, I didn't even know that was a thing. And he had to kind of like retract and apologize for some of his earlier statements because, he was just not correctly informed about the situation. And then Sony doubling down on that and being like, no, we're not even going to sell the game in your region. Just, again, an odd move at a time where they really didn't need to be making any odd moves, especially when the reason that they claim to, the reason that they're suggesting that they're making this, a necessity, enforcing this, was so flimsy. You're talking about griefing and abuse. Just talk about it being about, PSN signups and data and like just maybe that's a reach. They're never actually being honest about that stuff. But we all know it.
Yeah, and the thing that I said makes no sense is obviously it doesn't. You wouldn't have thought it would take much work to just speak to on the Steam side to sort out the griefing and the abuse side. Like you've already got people that are...
Exactly. There are so many ways around it, and telling people that they need to sign up with that, it's like sign in with a PlayStation Network account when PlayStation are, in fact, very new to this market and some of the complexities around it. Like, it's bullshit that no one was ever going to buy. That being said, when I saw it getting review bombed to the extent that like 100,000 negative Steam reviews were being left in a day, and I had people who I know kind of like who have played Helldivers 2 messaging me on WhatsApp going like, what's going on with Helldivers 2? Like, when it reached that point, I was like, okay, this has become one of those stories where it's just like...
It's such a dumb way to...
People need to be angry about something,
it's
and
such
Sony gave them an easy in.
Yeah, it was such a silly way to shoot yourself in the face after such a success story that Helldivers 2 was, when it should have been a week where there was, there was negative Xbox news because they've just done this thing with Bethesda, but then to turn around and for Sony to be like, do you know what? Do you know what we need to do? We just need to create a load more ill will toward Sony right now. That's what needs to happen. I think for me, as the real kicker was, because they didn't have this requirement on launch because of whatever issues they had, you had a lot of people that, have now signed up, played the game, are enjoying the game, to then turn around and be like, oh no, now this is a requirement. Now you're going to have to do this. I think that's never going to work. If it didn't work on launch, if it wasn't a requirement when you bought the game, just sack it off.
Yes, exactly. Because then it looks like a weird thing of like you're almost trapping people. There was concern in the early stages before Steam allowed people to refund the game. There was concern that Sony had pulled this move or pulled the rug out from under people's feet after they'd been deemed ineligible for refunds. So you were kind of like trapped with a copy of a game that you might not wanted to play anymore as a matter of principle. And then again, you always get that kind of interesting. I don't know what you think of where you come down it, but you'd always get those somewhat interesting clapbacks where some people go respond to the angrier folk on Twitter and say, "Are you really not going to play your favorite game of the year out of protest because you don't want to insert an email address and a password onto another platform?" And I think those people, I basically, there's a part of me that kind of sees both arguments. One, it's not as simple as that, and I understand that that you're giving away more than just a username and a password, and it's a little bit more complicated than those people are making it out to be. But two, also has to be an element of when are you cutting off your nose to spite your face,
right?
By choosing to not play your favorite game as a matter of principle when it's not even that important a principle to put your weight behind.
It is difficult because I was saying while you were away that away. It is frustrating in the modern world where everything needs you to sign up and log in and create an account. And
Totally.
for me, the reason I find it frustrating is because now I've got 13 billion passwords saved into a password manager that I have no idea what any of those passwords are. But every single one of them, to my mind, is a possible data breach in the future where someone hacks into something, steals your information, and
very true.
And a lot of these companies, they don't just require you to use your email address and create a password for them. They'll then go on to be like, okay, well, if you want to do this, if you want to do that, you need to give us a first name, you need to give us an actual address, you need to give us, and you think, okay, I've now got 50 different sites that all have my, quite a lot of information about me, and I'm constantly being told about hacks, about people stealing data. I'm constantly getting inundated with bullshit emails and things from scam things because my email's been released in another bloody data hack. And apparently, in this instance, it seems like it was a completely spurious reason to need you to create a PSN in the first place.
Totally. But would you, still, all that being true, would you stop playing your favorite game of the year out of protest for one more, to protest one more company asking for this information?
No.
And to your point, Sony have a bad track record when it comes with leaks and stuff like that. They are not not the most trustworthy company when it comes to handling your data.
Not at all. I it's not going to stop me playing my favorite game of the year. And I do think when people say that kind of thing, I think often they're people who don't play the game anyway. Or it's people who had no or they're just going to give their information over and play it anyway. But I suppose I think that people try and create this persona of themselves online, which is a lot more, a lot more principled, a lot more sort of like fire and brimstone, because that's the virtual version of themselves that they want to get across. And I think we see that time and time again with games about, I'm boycotting this developer, I'm not going to play this game, I'm not going to do that. And it's like, you're not though, are you? We all know you are. And I think haven't a number of people have been caught out that was on Steam and things like, I'm not playing this game out of principle, and then
there was the famous I think OG Modern Warfare 2 thing where a number of people planned to boycott it, and there was a group on Steam for people who'd boycotted it, something to do with a server related issue, designated server, all that kind of jazz. And there was a screenshot from the day of release of the Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 boycott club, and 66% of them were online playing Modern Warfare 2 on the day of release. There was a somewhat recent one that never picked up quite enough steam or traction that it warranted talking about, but Star Wars Outlaws. I'm gonna have to remember that game's name at some point. But the Ubisoft upcoming third-person open world Star Wars game. Um, they had a bit of controversy, last a few weeks ago when they released that trailer and outlined the various versions of the game because there was a $130, I think, version of the game that has an exclusive mission in it, and that exclusive mission, I believe, is your handler for it is Jabba the Hutt. And so people were looking at that and like, this is everything that's wrong with gaming. There's a $130 version of the game, and they're paywalling content kind of behind it. This is content that was developed, in the kind of the initial development period of the game. It could have just as easily been included in the main game, but it's been cut out to take more money from us. And Jabba the Hutt, who's an interesting character who we want to interact with, and all this kind of stuff. And you look at that and you're like, oh, I wonder if that had happened before. And it turns out, like, yeah, it happened inside the last 6 months. Assassin's Creed Mirage did the exact same thing. They cut out a mission, they put it behind the most expensive version of the game, and a couple of months after the game had come out, you could then get access to that content using like those Ubisoft points you get for getting those weird achievements that they offer.
Yeah.
Like they gave it to people essentially for free. And I'm not suggesting that Assassin's Creed and Star Wars are the same, or that insert Assassin's Creed character here and Jabba the Hutt are the same, but it was one of those things of like, oh, that was the exact same company doing the exact same thing not that long ago, but no one at that point stood up and said, hey, here's the thing we all need to be angry about today. Whereas with Star Wars, there was someone ready to take up that mantle, let everyone know this was happening, give everyone an opportunity to be outrageously angry, incensed by it for 48 hours, and then not talk about it ever again.
Yes. Well, I remember famously Destiny had there was the whole thing about that having areas of the map, there were areas that you could access, but you had to pay to get access to them. But it was like, but it's already on the disc and it's already there, which means that if it's already there, then you shouldn't have to pay extra for it. And I think I remember people at the time saying they were going to boycott that sort of similar situation. Yeah, I think that people deserve to have their voices heard when they're annoyed about something. I think maybe sometimes though, don't immediately jump to like the words. Don't jump to something you have no intention of doing. Just be purely because then you could look like a hypocrite if you've done it. But I don't think that means that people should not kick off about things that they think are unfair. I suppose that's how I would put it. We all want messages out there without having to say, I'm never going to play this. If you're going to play the game, maybe just don't say that. Maybe just say, I want you to know how angry I am. Like that seems a bit more sensible.
And everything's more confusing with the anonymity afforded to us by social media. When I'm talking about the people here who are getting angry, a lot of them could just be like totally anonymous, like accounts, and they end up feeling or being completely removed from the individuals who make purchasing decisions at the end of the day. And maybe the long and short of it is just don't read too much into, what people anonymously spew on platforms that give them the ability to say whatever they want and, be whoever they want with zero repercussions.
Agreed. I think as well, with maybe the last sort of quote we had from PlayStation, where they're saying they're learning what's right for PC players. Maybe you go the other way, Sony. Maybe you do more carrot and less stick, and you say if you sign up for a PSN and you're playing on PC, you can get these extra things for your game. You can get this special skin. You can get this special blah blah blah, whatever it is. Maybe that's the.
Do you think this even happens if that's how they'd phrased it?
No.
Do you think this even becomes a story? Interesting.
Yes, it becomes a story, but not to the same scale. I think because the real issue for me here is as soon as you can say this game is no longer going to be available for sale in some territories, to me, I'm like, just make it available in those territories and don't require the PSN sign up. Like, surely, if you don't need it, which has been shown because of this, I mean, what are you saying, that you're worried that some people in small territories around the world are going to be abusers and griefers? Like, no, you'll be fine, and just have a separate, or have people on the Steam side that can kick those people if that's really required. But
exactly.
I don't know. It seems like Sony have made a bit of a thing out of something that didn't need to be.
Yeah, go figure.
Go figure, indeed. Let's move on to our final story of the day, from Sony to Nintendo, because we have confirmation from Nintendo itself that the next console, the as yet unnamed, don't know what it's going to be called, possible the Switcheroo, will be coming in the next in this fiscal year, which ends March 2025.
Well, announced.
Sorry, it'll be announced, not it'll be coming. It'll be announced in this financial year. Two very different things.
It doesn't mean you're wrong, but it gives them more wiggle room.
It does give them more wiggle room. Yeah, they're going to be announcing it. In a statement published alongside its financial results, President Shuntaro Furukawa, I cannot say it, Furukawa, there we go, thank you, said the company would also hold a Nintendo Direct in June, but they have said that will not be in relation to the new hardware, so don't get too excited about that. That the hardware news will come later on in the year. We don't know exactly when, but as we said, it's going to be pre-end of fiscal year. I have a quote here from him. He said, "It will have been over 9 years since we announced the existence of Nintendo Switch back in March 2015. We'll be holding a Nintendo Direct this June regarding the Nintendo Switch software lineup for the latter half of 2024. But please be aware that there will be no mention of the Nintendo Switch successor during that presentation." I find it kind of interesting. I know it's not that surprising, really, but the fact they won't even say Switch 2 and that, like, as a little holder name or something. It's the successor.
I think if you get into like Switch 2, you're talking about like technically working off the back of an existing trademark, and it begins to sound too much like a believable product name, and then all of a sudden you've got a whole PR mess where you're like, no, it was never called the Switch 2. Please stop calling it the Switch 2. It's the Switcheroo.
It's the Switcheroo. It's got to be the Switcheroo, surely. We've put it out there into the ether now. It's got to happen.
I mean, someone has to be listening. We've talked about all three of the major home console players this podcast. We're either I don't know. We're either getting a hot scoop on the Nintendo Switch successor. We're getting I don't know, maybe an apology from PlayStation, or Phil Spencer is going to give us an exclusive interview. One of those three things will be happening within the next couple of weeks. It's guaranteed.
Oh yes, please. Let's round this out with some stats about the Switch that we got released along with this financial presentation that came out. So in the financial results for the year that ended March 2024, Nintendo confirmed it had sold 15.7 million Switch consoles, which just beat out its forecast of 15.5 million, for a total of 141.32 million. That is mental. The company projected console sales would fall to 14%. By 14% to 13.5 million for the current fiscal year ending March 2025, and it expects net profit to fall by 38.9% as well. And if the Switch hits those sales targets, it'll be close to beating the Nintendo DS and PlayStation 2 as the best-selling console in history. Those are 154 million units and 160 million units, respectively, for those two. Do you know what's funny though? Because when you put the fact that they've said we will be announcing a new hardware, they have to know, I suppose, I hadn't thought about it like this, that in the current fiscal year, if they've said we're going to announce it, the fiscal year that it does get released, they're going to take a massive hit on the existing units, because if you hear the Switch 2's coming out, you're not going to get a Switch 1. You're going to hold off for a decent amount of the people, or you're going to know that the Switch 1 is going to drop in price, and you'd be better off waiting until the Switch 2 comes out in order to get yourself a bargain.
Yeah, I mean, they've said as much, right? Like they've acknowledged that they expect their net profits to fall by basically 40% between now and March.
But is that just anyway because it's just like age of console, or is that because they're like, we're gonna say it?
I think it's because of it. I think you're talking about a console that's been on the market for 9 years. They haven't been experiencing 40% losses in revenue year on year, 9 years over. I think this is probably the biggest and deepest dip yet, and it's because I don't know when the Switch successor is going to come out, but they're going to have to announce it at some point. I wouldn't be surprised if they announced it this calendar year, for example. I don't think we'll have to wait all the way till March of 2025. And as soon as something's out there and it's public knowledge, like you don't even have to be the savviest of parents to know that, hey, don't go and pick up a Nintendo Switch off the store shelves this Christmas, for example. And that's probably going to make it. This is probably going to make it like the first Christmas, for example, where that is going to be the clear instruction. so I think the next console will probably already be announced by the time the parents are doing Christmas shopping. So I think that's probably why we're seeing a dip. Or but it's cool. It's cool that these things are all being firmed up, and for as much as we kind of trust our insiders, and for as much as we operate on a number of confirmed rumors here on this podcast and many other podcasts like ours, knowing that we are kind of in the end game for the Nintendo Switch, which is exactly what that console needs at this point, is exciting. It does, yeah, and it's also in a weird way nice to be told up front that we're going to have a fairly quiet, sort of like flaccid summer. And I don't know what the holdouts are going to be for that Nintendo Direct in June. I'm sure they're going to probably prop it up with one or two things, to try and give people a reason to at least keep the Nintendo Switch in mind going into kind of calendar Q4. We may even be talking about kind of like what end up being the beginnings or the early rumblings of some cross-gen titles. It's also going to be interesting to see, like, once and for all, hey, which games just never came out on the Switch? Because obviously this is, in theory, the last big direct that something like Metroid Prime 4, for example, could show up at before it's like, yeah, that game just never even came out on the console it was targeting. Which, historically, for your Duke Nukems of the world and your Two Humans of the world, has been a real problem. But I don't think it'll be a problem for Nintendo.
No, agreed. So when did you put your money on the actual release date? If you're a betting man,
I mean,
because there's so announcements this year, fiscal year. So are you saying it will be released like end of next year or beginning next year?
I think it will be beginning. Obviously, they have they have projected net profit to fall by enough between in the kind of the range that we're currently in, that goes up to March 2025. That suggests that the console's not going to launch in that in that window. It reminds me of when Take-Two tried to be really coy about when they were expecting GTA 6 to come out, and analysts and shareholders were like, why do you think you're going to make 4 times as much money as you've ever made before in 2025? And Take-Two were like, just a hunch.
We've got big plans for GTA Online.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously we don't know, like, there's no kind of Nintendo version of that. But it does suggest to me that maybe now we're getting confirmation that we're not going to see the console before March. That said, I still expect it to be early. I can still totally see kind of, I don't know. Like, in my mind going into this, like prior to this announcement and these financial results, we were going to hear something by the end of this year, calendar, and we were going to see it early next year. Maybe that's shifted around a little bit. Like, they could, for example, like do kind of like similar to what they did with the Switch, and like go as late as sort of like maybe January 25, for example, as like a big blowout announcement show, and the console releases in an April kind of window. I'll have to remind myself what the original Nintendo
I think it was
Switch
March
did.
3rd. I think the first Switch was released March 3rd, which they seem to favour either March or November for console releases. So I think you might be onto something. I think the idea that maybe they show off the hardware end of the year, calendar year, and then they actually release the very end of the fiscal year, sort of beginning of the next fiscal year.
Okay,
would make total sense.
They announced the console and the official name and a trailer showing off the fact that the hardware and the fact it was a hybrid device in October. And then the big kind of like they had some other things. Reggie went on Jimmy Fallon in December. And then they had that big live stream in January that I referred to, where they like played Breath of the Wild, for example, amongst other things. So yeah, if they want to do a similar lead up, like then yeah, I still think that we should see something this year. This is a console that at one point in time was allegedly coming out this year and got pushed into next year, which just makes me think that it still has to be kind of like late Q1, early Q2 calendar. But we'll see. Nintendo like to keep us on our toes. And if they are really close to, if the Switch is like really, really, I don't think they'd actually do this, but if the Switch is really, really close to becoming the best-selling console in history, maybe they couple of last-minute fire sales. Who knows?
Yeah, that's mad. It's not mad at all. It kind of makes a lot of sense. But yeah, for it to be the biggest selling console, that's kind of crazy. But
yeah, and it's been on the market for an incredibly long time, like longer than most consoles are on the market as the primary Nintendo console, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. And but hey, they needed that after the Wii U, so well done, Nintendo. Anyway, from one, I was going to say, I forgot the word I was going to use. Anyway,
that important.
It can't be that important. Anyway, it's the end of the podcast. Thank you everyone for listening, for watching. If you are watching us live, or if you're catching up on a podcasting platform of your choice, or if you're catching up on YouTube, thank you so much. You can reach out to us at SuperShow Pod, and like I said before, if you want to go over to our Patreon, patreon.com/SuperShow, and you want to show us a little bit of love there, you can join our Discord for as little as $2. So yeah, there you go. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jamie, for joining me and chatting about gaming news.
An absolute pleasure, and a big thank you to you, especially this week of all weeks, for your little solo stint in the middle there. That I won't try and make a regular feature of the podcast. I know it's a weird thing to say, but I do traditionally pride myself on my bowel control. But this was one of those ones. I'm fascinated to go back to the VOD and just look at my face in the moments leading up to my decision to tell you and indeed the world about my dilemma, because I was sweating, I was twitching, I was moving all over the place, and I was like, this thing won't go away. Usually I can get it to sit and play nice for a little bit. Just sit, boy, sit. You'll get your time in the sun.
Well, I'm glad you weren't away.
Was not playing ball.
I'm glad you weren't away too long. It didn't leave me dangling on my own for too long. It went weird as well because when you went,
I didn't leave many things dangling for too long either.
I was going to say, yeah, Rodrigo in chat has just said Double Jonesy was great. So when you went, because you closed your camera, my camera duplicated for some reason into the chat. So they had
nice.
Me times two, a little mirror image. So yeah, that's how that went.
Kramer versus Kramer. Not a reference that actually means anything with the context of you talking to yourself on a Discord chat, but just the reference that popped into my head.
There you go. Thank you, everyone. We will see you same time-ish, probably. I don't know. I always say that, and then it's going to be Wednesday for some reason. We will see you roughly same time, same place next week. Thank you very much. Bye.